Good morning, everyone. So I'm really sorry for the slight delay in us getting online. So we've just had some technical problems, but hopefully everything will work okay now. So good morning and welcome to the first Teach Meet for PSHE. I'm really honoured to have been given the opportunity to run this event. We are part of the much broader Teachmeet Icons group, which has got lots of different subject-related areas. PSHE is obviously slightly different in that pretty much everyone that's involved in teaching teaches PSHE at some point or another, to some extent or another. And I think it's important that we're able to start building a community around that and helping each other as PSHE becomes more and more of a focus in schools. I'm Jess Katner. I've been teaching for about 9 years, and my passion's always been PSHE. I know that makes me rare, I suppose, in some respects. I think a lot of the time we go to university, we study our specialist subjects, and then we leave, we do our teacher training, and we go in and deliver the things that we've gone to university to study. And I think it's increasingly rare that subject of study is PSHE. So it can be quite daunting going into your first teaching job, or even working in another school, or even in the same school, but being asked to deliver something that is different and outside of perhaps your comfort zone. But at some point or another, pretty much like I've said, everyone that teaches in the classroom will be involved at some point in teaching PSHE. So we've got some great speakers today. We've got a couple of fantastic sponsors as well, who are going to take us through the morning, give us some information, some inspiration, and we will all hopefully leave at lunchtime a little bit wiser around the various aspects of PSHE. I ran a poll on the TM PSHE Icons group back, it was a couple of months ago, about which area of PSHE people would be most interested in, because obviously it's a huge area, and relationships came out as the strongest. So there is a relationships focus to what we're looking at today. There will obviously be reference to other parts of PSHE, and events in the future will focus on other areas as well, but there is a relationships focus to a fair bit of what we're talking about today. A massive thank you to Gemma and Tim, who are behind the scenes. Tim's sorting out the tech stuff, and Gemma is working with the team to work with the sponsors and all of those sorts of things. So a massive thank you to both of them. So we have got a sponsor to introduce Brett from Pupil Progress. He's going to give us a quick presentation about what Pupil Progress is all about. They've been sponsoring various different aspects of TM Icons now for nearly 5 years, and have an incredible tracking system that can save time, effort, and also it can help to sharpen up what you need to teach. So well worth paying attention to for the next few minutes. Thanks very much.
Morning, guys. Morning. How you doing?
Morning.
I'm just going to just share screen in a moment. Super excited to be part of another Teach Meet. We like we just had mentioned, we've been sponsoring now for about 5 years. It's incredible to see it grow across all these subject areas, especially now covering subjects like PHAC, which is just such an important aspect of school life. I'm going to just share screen and show you a little bit about the system and how we can help. Do tune in. If you are a Pixel school, please pay attention, because we do have a partnership with Pixel, which will allow you to actually use what you're about to see now at zero cost. So there's nothing you need to sign up to. There's nothing you need to get invoices approved for. As part of your Pixel membership, you will be able to access this system. So I am just going to try and see if at the moment it's not allowing me to share screen. I don't know if you can just share the permissions. Bear with me 1 second. Whether I can actually, or I can see if I can actually bring it up on this screen. me see if I can share my own screen. Yeah, at the moment it's not allowing me to share screen, so apologies for that. So if someone, just someone from the back end of the team icons, if you can just have a look at just giving me permission to share screen. If you are if you are a Pixel School, please go to www.pupilprogress.com. On pupilprogress.com, you'll be able to then click on Get Started Now, and on Get Started Now, you'll be able to actually literally type in the name of your school, and you'll be able to see if you're a Pixel School. The actual subscription comes up automatically and will allow you to actually start your subscription, and it will come up in the subscriptions area. And if you aren't a Pixel School, you can trial our system for 4 weeks at zero cost too, and you can also book a demonstration. For those of you who are actual school leaders, we've got the ability to track and monitor progress across every single subject area and every single qualification and exam board, and it will allow you to get a real firm grip of what's going on across the whole entire school, not just not just individual department areas. I don't know, is anyone from the team icons able to give that permission to share screen? That's okay. That's no worries. Well, I appreciate your time this morning.
Hi, Brett. Hey, it's Tom. I'm not sure. There shouldn't be a permissions thing. You should just be able to share. I don't think there is.
It's not.
So what's it saying? Is there a share button at the bottom?
Yeah, share button. Yeah, there's a share button at the bottom, but it's not allowing me to.
What's it saying when you click it?
It's just saying about permissions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, we'll try and sort it. Come back to you later.
Yeah, that's no worries. That's no worries. Well, I hope everyone has a great time this morning, and I'll try and catch you later. Okay.
Thanks so much, Brett. Sorry about the technical issues. We seem to be having a lot of tech issues this morning. Sorry about that.
That's no worries. That's no worries. I'll speak to you in a sec.
Okay, so before we go into our first sort of keynote speaker, I suppose, I'm just going to speak for a few minutes about how we can effectively teach skills in PSHE, because there's a lot that is done in schools, and it's absolutely fantastic, and around the curriculum, and the curriculum is, as most curricula now are, very knowledge based. There is a lot within the PSHE Association guidance around how to deliver, or at least to deliver skills, but it's about how we go about doing that. So just kind of a whistle really on how I've seen this work really effectively in schools. I think skill is really important, because ultimately, if you're teaching young people just the knowledge, you're teaching them, for example, smoking causes lung cancer, and this is how, and this is how much of a risk that is, and these are the health implications. But you're not teaching young people to manage the expectations and perhaps the social pressures around smoking. Then really that knowledge that they have of how dangerous it is isn't going to equip them to manage that situation in the real world. So another example is around the idea of managing money. Again, you can teach young people about how money works, about how finance works, about the different options around savings and investments, and whether how to get a mortgage and how tax works. But again, if they don't know the skills behind how to think about money and to think about saving as important, then they're not going to understand that moving forward. Relationships, there's certainly a lot of skills involved in terms of, again, you can teach what a healthy relationship looks like, but it's about teaching them the skill behind the behavior that they need to be able to exhibit, so that they can actually learn and move forward and be able to manage situations such as, for example, coercion and control. So one way that I've seen this done really, really effectively is through scenario-based learning. So yesterday, a colleague and I actually delivered to the whole school in assembly sessions about sexual harassment and sexual violence. Now, assembly sessions are not the best way of doing that necessarily, but we wanted to give a start point from which we can then build from there. So all students in the school have at least now accessed that start point of what sexual harassment and sexual violence are. What we then did as part of that session was we gave scenarios based on age groups, based on safeguarding information that's come from the teams within school. And we wrote scenarios which we then got the students to examine and discuss and feedback on. So this was a scenario that we gave to Year 9 students. And it's something that I am a safeguarding officer in my school, and it's something that we've seen happen. It happens with alarming regularity, actually, this sort of thing. So we got them to read the scenario, deliberately chose names that nobody in the year group has, and then got them to consider whether that is sexual harassment or sexual violence, and why, and to be able to explain that. And then we also asked them to think, what about that behaviour is disrespectful? Because we'd started the session talking about definitions, but also how it links with the basic concepts of respect in relationships that they'd learned in previous sessions. So from there, we were able to get from them, they were able to think of it in a real world context. We then went through some misconceptions which link with this scenario that they'd looked at around it not being that common. We know as staff, especially as safeguarding staff, that it is that common, but I think young people think if it's not talked about a lot, and if they're not hearing about it, especially on social media very much, then it's perhaps something that's not happening. And therefore they perhaps are less likely to report it because they feel that it's not something that people will understand. It's not something that people will be able to help with. We also did a lot of work around, yes, the scenario is a female who, the negative behaviours come from a male, but that doesn't mean that it can't happen to boys. There's a lot to unpick around some of the rhetoric around sexual harassment, and that boys perhaps might feel that they're not able to report because it doesn't happen to boys. So we did a lot of work on that, a lot of work around banter, and also around, some acts being considered to be compliments, so wolf whistling, catcalling, etc. And we linked those all back to that scenario. We then moved on with the same scenario to them being able to think about what they could do next. And that's really important. And we also asked them, well, what could that group of friends do next? And by getting them to think about a real life, in inverted commas, scenario, it helps them to build those skills around, firstly, having a discussion using these sorts of ideas. And secondly, it also helps them to think, if they were in that position, what would they do next? What would they advise a friend to do next? So rather than it being, this is sexual harassment, this is what it looks like, this is what you should do, they're actually thinking, how could they go about doing that? Okay, so that just led to a lot of discussion and hopefully gave the students a bit of a takeaway. Another time that I've used this sort of technique was with sixth form students, again looking at the scenarios around a couple of different things, but this is to do with manipulation. So again, you could teach a young person what manipulation is. You could even teach them what it looks like, but if they walk out of the session not knowing or not having any understanding of the skills that they could use themselves to be able to combat that sort of behaviour, to recognise it, and then to work to not allow themselves to be manipulated, then really the session hasn't helped them perhaps as much as it could have. So I went through a couple of scenarios to see how the people in the scenarios have been manipulated, and we then linked it to a process. And at each stage broke it down into what could have happened, or what could Samira in this case have done to try to overcome some of those different kind of aspects throughout it. So yes, she's going to university soon. Yes, it's her first festival. That means that she's outnumbered. It's also an unfamiliar context for her. and then looking at what could happen in the future, and then trying to break down the ways in which she could perhaps have overcome those, again through discussion and through the students putting themselves in that situation. Obviously, a really important aspect of scenario-based learning is to make sure that the young people, well, the scenarios are appropriate for the young people. So obviously age appropriate, but also in terms of their own context. So I know that a lot of our young people that I delivered this session to are going to festivals for the first time in the coming summer. So it made sense to do that. And obviously there's work, like collaborative work, that can be done between the safeguarding team and the PSHE team as well. Okay, so thank you very much. That's just a very kind of quick whistle stop from me. And I'm now going to introduce our next speaker. So our next speaker, I'm just going to stop my screen. So our next speaker is Alice Hoyle, who is going to be speaking about whole school RSE. Alice has co-written this fantastic book, which I would recommend to anybody who is a PSHE lead, an RSE lead. It gives some really great ways of tackling some of those tricky topics, and ways that students will walk away from the session having, again, developed skills. And I found it really useful in my practice as well. So Alice, over to you.
Hello.
Hi, welcome.
Brilliant. Right. Glad we've all got stuff working. Thanks for the big shout out on the book. That's really nice. So I will try and share my screen and hopefully this will work. We had a little behind screens practice, so I'm optimistic. Right, here we go. Hopefully that's all working for you. So today I'm going to try and make it a bit interactive for you because you're all here on a Saturday morning and, you know, probably exhausted after a long week. So I'm going to keep you awake. Sorry. So if you can go to menti.com and use the code that's at the top of the screen, 65922411. And then press the heart when you found it, because that will mean we'll be able to interact together for this session. So hopefully some of you will start finding it. You don't need to download anything. You don't need just another screen. It's ideal if you've got a touch screen because there will be some drop-in activities as we go through. So one person has found us. So we're halfway there. I'm not sure how many people are sort of live streaming at the minute. And sorry, if you're watching this on catch up, you won't be able to interact live. So a couple of people have found us, which is marvelous. So I'm going to move on because I've got half an hour to whistle stop tour you through lots of stuff related to relationships and sex education. So the code is at the top of the screen on most slides, and it's www.menti.com, and that'll bring you to the slide. So a little bit about me. As Jess said, yeah, I wrote Great Relationships and Sex Education. That was my second book that I wrote with Esther McGeaney. My first book explained schizophrenia to children because I'm really interested in the idea of explaining how we can explain safely difficult topics to children. My background was a science teacher, specialised in PSHE, went on to be a local authority advisor for RSE for Enfield and HIV education for Enfield and Haringey. And sort of since I've had my children, I've been freelance in sort of sex ed world. So I've worked for Durex. I worked for a project called the Sex and History Project. I wrote a national scheme for Wales, which is a little bit dated now. So if you're a Welsh teacher and you're familiar with Sense, let's try and get some funding to update it, please. I am a trustee of the Sex Education Forum and a life member of the PSHE Association. So both of those organisations, hopefully you're aware of. They're awesome. And I also do bits of work for It Happens. And then locally, I work as a youth worker now and again, an LGBT youth worker, sort of I help set up a mental health cafe called the OK Cafe. So please do get in touch on Twitter or email if you need me, basically. Quick overview of the book then, because it sort of sets out my principles for how I think what great relationships and sex education should look like. And for me, it's about, me and Esther, it being co-produced with young people, inclusive and critical, rights-based, safe and ethical, creative and curious. We want to have lots of fun as we do it, and I've got silver foil and all sorts of things that I use, and holistic and interdisciplinary. And broadly, the overview of the book is that the most important thing is the creating safer spaces element, and then the concluding the learning, you know, bringing it all together, the assessment evaluation type stuff. And then broadly, this is what RSE consists of. It is about relationships. It is about gender and sexual equality. It's about bodies. Bodies is my absolute favourite chapter. I love that. Lots of awesome diagrams. And the cool thing is the book's been translated into Spanish. So I've learned that escroto is scrotum in Spanish. And I just love that. So I've got lots of comedy Spanish words that I'm learning. Sex and sexual health are, the broad framework. So I'm not sure if you are primary or secondary. I've got a slide to find that out in a moment. But just to say, the book was written for 11 plus kids, but we've gone through it with primary colleagues to colour code it. And we have worked out that about 60% of it is actually suitable for primary schools. And so if the activity is labelled a green, I have this document available on the Padlet, so I can try and get it sent out afterwards. But if it's labelled green, you could do it in a primary school, no bother. If it's amber, it'd be like, well, you need to differentiate it down. And if it's a strike through, it's not really suitable for that age group. So because this is such a whistle-stop tour, do contact me on Twitter. My email address is on the screen. And also, just to say, I run a Facebook group for RSE professionals. We've got almost 2,500 professionals in there at the moment. And it's a great space for going, oh, have you seen this? Or how would I approach this? Or I've got this particular issue. Or has anyone got a copy of this policy? And there's lots of people available who can help you. And it's moderated by RSE experts. So we sort of sometimes have to steer some of the conversations more into best practice. But do join that. If you do join it, do say Alice said to join, because we do sometimes get people who are maybe anti-RSE who want to come in. So first things, how are you feeling this morning? Because when we're trying to think about safer spaces is the most important thing for any relationships and sex education that you do. The kids in your classroom need to feel safe. And I appreciate it's slightly different when you're in a Saturday morning and, on your computers and things. But in terms of making a sort of safe-ish learning environment, which is tricky when it's going to be streamed on YouTube, is you should be able to write some words about how you guys are doing today. So it's on menti.com and using the code 65922411. And I do this all the time because I like to do a sort of group check-in. And, with circle time in PSHE, when you've got a 40-minute lesson, you do not have time to go around every person in the class and do a group check-in. So sometimes just getting these one words sort of sense check, and nobody's feeling it at the minute. No one's responded yet to how they're feeling. But whenever I do this with young people and professionals and everybody, there's always one word that comes through really clearly. So I'm just going to reveal and see if you guys are the same as everyone else that I do this with. Ooh, interesting. Oh, it's coming through. So tired always comes through with the big one. Everybody is knackered. We're 2 years into a global pandemic. It's very stressful. Everybody is really, really feeling it. But broadly, we've got some really positive, happy. In fact, you're a more enthusiastic group than some people I train. So that's brilliant. But we're happy, we're tired, we're optimistic. Range of feelings in the room, and that's okay. So because of time, I'm going to whistle stop you on again. So I'll try and give you a warning before I move my slides on, just so I don't lose, if you're in the middle of typing something fabulous. The other thing around safer spaces is having a sort of framework for ethical behaviour. And I use this in every single training I do because we want everybody to feel safe. And I just think if everybody followed this ditty, the world would be a nicer place. And the ditty goes, taking care of me, taking care of you, having an equal say and learning as we go. And it was based in research into sexual ethics done by Moira Carmody. And then another sex educator in Australia, Jenny Walsh, who's a shero of mine, she adapted it into this ditty. And we actually structured the whole of the relationships chapter in our book around this ditty. Because broadly what it is getting your own needs met, looking after yourself in a relationship, meeting the needs of the other person in a relationship, having an equal say, so making sure there's no power imbalance, there's no coercion, that you're both equally able to get your needs met. And then learning as we go, recognizing that nobody is born perfect at relationships, that, there will be arguments, there will be ruptures, and it's how you repair and strengthen those relationships. I've used this with primary school, secondaries, adults, and I just love it because it's just really simple. Yes, you can apply it to a sexual context, but you can also apply it to a friendship. And then we also apply it to having a a group agreement, because any sex ed that you do, in fact, any PSHE, you must have a group agreement in place. You must have a structure that keeps the learning environment safe for everybody. So example sort of rules that go in a group agreement are things like, you know, basically being kind to yourself, avoiding sharing personal stories. And that's really important because it can be exposing. We don't want kids to make a disclosure in an unsafe way. We want kids to seek help if they need it. We don't want people making assumptions. As educators, obviously, we can never promise confidentiality. So our role of taking care of you, the kids in the classroom, might be, you know, referring on and working with them to get more support. We want kids to do things like challenge the statement, not the person, taking it in turns for speaking and listening, and also keeping the details of the conversation in the room. I'm recognizing there's no such thing as a silly question. So always, however you do your group agreement, it doesn't have to be like this. Always make sure you've got a group agreement that's developed with your class and makes everybody in the class feel safe. And then the next thing about safety as well is around thinking about PSHE in terms of comfort, stretch and panic. And I use this model all of the time. So the idea being that when you're in your comfort zone, everything's chilled, everything's relaxed, you're fine. If you're in your stretch zone, it's a little bit more challenging, but most importantly, you feel safe in this zone. You know, you might have a bit of adrenaline, but you feel safe. And then in the panic zone, that's where fight or flight's been triggered. You need a wee. It's all gone a bit awry. And it's a way of children and young people thinking about their boundaries for different activities. So it might be sending a nude, or it might be standing up in public. And kids will have different responses to that. And it's unpacking that, you know, when you're in your panic zone, that's a sign that you've got to get some help. There is always someone who can help you if you fight or flight's been triggered and you're in your panic zone. And the other way, the sort of slightly linked way of thinking about this, is thinking about it in terms of body boundaries. So it might be certain activities might have you in your comfort zone. Some might be maybe, maybe not, or maybe next time, or maybe when I'm older. And some of them are hard pass, absolute no, I will not do that. And I have these cards that are intimacy cards, and what's fascinating is a hard boundary for so many young people is sharing a toothbrush. I mean, all sorts of sex they are totally fine with the idea of, and think, you know, that's okay with maybe, maybe not, but sharing a toothbrush, hard no. That is an absolute boundary for many young people. I find it fascinating. So can I just take a moment to get you to drop a pin in the zone that reflects how you feel about teaching RSE? And as we're a group of PSHE professionals, it might be very different to when I do a whole school approach. So when I do the whole school approach with, you know, everybody to cover that, you know, sometimes RSE conversations come up in form times or in the corridor, you know, lots of teachers are in the panic zone. So we've got about 5. I think there's probably more people in the room, but maybe people are struggling to join in with the Mentimeter. Menti.com, code at the top of the screen. Don't need to download anything. It will bring you so you can all interact. So no surprises there. You are all in your comfort or your stretch zone. Nobody's in your panic zone. If, however, you do this with colleagues and they're in the panic zone, that is, I always say, never ever teach PSHE or RSE that takes you to your panic zone. It's not safe for you and it's not safe for your learners. So that is an indicator that you need to get some more help, training, support, team teaching, whatever. So, you know, use this model with colleagues if you are in the position that you do need to sort of train and support colleagues as well, to get them thinking about how they feel about this stuff. So what is a whole school culture for RSE? For me, it's connected, kind, empowering, collaborative, equal and consensual. And there's so much to unpack around consent, particularly in schools, like can kids fully consent to wearing school uniform, or detentions, or all of that sort of stuff. There is so much there, and, you know, it is a challenge depending on the school and things, but we need to start addressing lots of this stuff with our kids and sort of thinking about them, because RSE in isolation in a lesson is not going to have nearly as much impact as the whole school approach. And I know you've got Dr. Emily Seti talking to you a bit later on about the whole school approach, and I'm going to be signposting one of their documents in a moment, which is Transforming School Cultures Through Relationships and Sex Education. I absolutely love this document. Do you know what? I'm suddenly having a little bit of a panic, and I'm just going to stop sharing for a minute. Oh, I am in the right thing. That's fine, because I was thinking one of my slides has gone missing and I was suddenly panicking. I was sharing the wrong slide, but it's okay. Learning as we go. I'm on the right thing. It's just, I had some questions about what year groups you teach and they've not appeared yet. So I was fiddling with my slide order, but anyway. Transforming school cultures through relationships and sex education. I'm sure Dr. Emily Seti will be talking you through that. So I won't go into much detail other than it's awesome and go and have a look at it. The Children's Commissioner report is awesome and very good for sharing with parents. So it can really help spark that conversation with parents. All the rest of them are fairly sort of self-explanatory. I hope your safeguarding lead has seen the sexual behaviours traffic light tool from Brooke. That's a really helpful document. And also, if you're thinking about addressing sexual harassment, one of a really useful co-created piece of work was the agenda materials for Wales, and there's primary and secondary, and they've got lots of really lovely activities in them. Right, cracking on. The World Health Organization, very recently, it's only a few weeks ago, have pointed out, they've done a load of research, that good sex is safer sex. So I would like to urge you, when you're thinking about the relationships and sex education that you deliver, that you're not just focusing on the sexual health side of it. We also need to be thinking about sexual rights, and we also need to be thinking about sexual pleasure. So sort of think about it as this triangle, that we don't want to miss these things out. And I could go into all sorts of detail on that, but I'm whistling through. And also a really useful bits of evidence from the Sex Education Forum, really helpful to share with your teachers, with your parents, is that the evidence for RSE is really clear. Young people who receive effective, and the key word there is effective, relationships and sex education are more likely to report sexual abuse, more likely to delay first sex until they're ready, more likely that first sex is consensual, more likely to use contraception and condoms, and less likely to have an unplanned pregnancy or sexually transmitted infection. So this subject works, it's really effective, it's really powerful. It just needs to be done right. And I think recently we've become very bogged down into statutory RSE. Now, the statutory RSE stuff is good. It definitely could be better. It's kind of very focused on prevention and combat things in a quite negative way. But it's also, if we get bogged down in the statutory RSE, we're not necessarily providing the RSE that young people need. So I'd like you to do the big picture because, for example, the statutory RSE in England doesn't mention pleasure. The Welsh curriculum does mention pleasure, but it doesn't mention penis and vulva. Like, you're supposed to use correct names, but it's all sort of a little bit fudged. Doesn't mention masturbation. There's lots of words that are missing that could be there that we need to sort of talk about, and so on. Okay, so let's. These are the slides that I was suddenly panicking that I hadn't got. So, out of interest, are you an experienced teacher of RSE in the room? Have you received sufficient training and support to deliver relationship, sex and health education? In your school, is it taught by a small team of specialist teachers? And is the status of RSHE in your school equal or elevated even to other subjects? Just out of interest, have a moment to fill that in. A range in the room. And the biggest thing there is RSHE not being taught by a small team of specialist teachers. That's best practice if we can get it. It shouldn't be the gap in the timetable. It shouldn't be the person who's under timetable and forced to teach it, especially if they're in their panic zone and things for this subject. It needs to be a small dedicated team. I appreciate timetabling and all of that doesn't always work, but it is basically the most important subject that you could teach. And the thing is with the pedagogy of RSE is I always argue that RSE teachers are better teachers overall. And if a teacher wants to improve their general teaching practice, they should also teach RSE because it requires additional skills in creating and maintaining safer spaces, answering tricky questions, facilitating challenging discussions. And there's also all the subject knowledge and the safeguarding stuff that goes alongside that. So the best teachers tell you where to look, but don't tell you what to see. And obviously the picture I've included here is absolutely a flower painted by Georgia O'Keeffe. Okay, so what emoji best reflects your own experiences of relationships and sex education? This can be at home or at school. When you were growing up, what was your RSE like? Shock horror face already, straight away. Thumbs down we've got. Any more for any more? Cross emoji, zipped mouth, eek face, eyes over shh. Oh, we've got a thumbs up. Brilliant. I usually get 1 or 2 thumbs up, but generally, overwhelmingly, the experiences that we've all had of our own RSE is quite negative. Part of the reason I do what I do is because of my own experiences of RSE. And I think we have to acknowledge that our own experiences haven't been great. And sometimes that then sort of transmits in how we deliver RSE. So we need to be thinking about that. And I think the most important thing with that is thinking about the distancing of it to keep ourselves safe in the lessons. It's not about trying to make kids avoid the mistakes we made as a kid, for example. So we need to keep it distant to keep it very safe. So I would always say caution with personal stories. So sometimes role modeling can be helpful, but personal sexual or drug experiences never appropriate to share. If you're thinking about sharing a wider experience where you think it might have some learning value, don't share if there's any heat for you, because you're making it about you and not them. And RSE is always about them and not about us. It's not about our experiences. So you can use distancing statements like, I had a friend that, or I know someone who. So you could still use the learning from the story you want to share, but without making it personal. Also, using distancing language that doesn't imply your own personal knowledge, because you'll get questions like, what does semen taste like? And suddenly you're like, oh gosh, I don't know how to answer that, because then they'll know that I know what semen tastes like, for example. So, you can always answer it with some people say, or people think, generalize it out and don't answer it with a I know or in my experience. And also, please don't cold call in PSHE or RSE lessons. Don't put kids on the spot, because that's not making it safe. You want to keep answers general, or get people to volunteer, or what might people say if they did know the answer, or things like that. Don't you always want the young people in your room to have a right to pass, to keep it feeling safe for everybody. So out of interest, how do you feel about these subjects, these topics? This topic terrifies me, or I am confident with this topic. So you should be able to answer those on the Padlet, and I'll explain where these topics have come from. So the Unesco Technical Guidance is an overarching worldwide document as to what relationships and sexuality education should look like. The Welsh curriculum actually used that as a lot of their framework for developing their curriculum. Sadly, the English curriculum didn't do that quite so much, but there's lots of topics in there, and it breaks it all down. Page 35 has this sort of summary of all these different topic areas for what we're trying to cover. So how do we feel about some of these topics? And that's really interesting, because whenever I do this with professionals, gender is coming out time and time again as something teachers are really worried about at the minute, because it's got so very polarized, so very, very tricky. We absolutely need to be talking about it and addressing it and unpacking it with our young people. I could do a whole day's training on that alone easily. I'm actually going to be hopefully working with West Sussex. So if you're a West Sussex school, we're going to be doing a whole project on that. So yeah, come back to me on it, because that's the biggest topic of our time. And I've got a slide on that at the moment, in a moment. Because of time, I am going to whistle you on, because as usual, I've packed my training. And I want to make sure that I've got about 8 minutes left before the next speaker. So I don't want to take somebody else's time. So I'm going to whisk you on, but that's really helpful, and no surprises there that we're broadly most confident with skills for health and wellbeing, and gender is a topic we're struggling with. Just to reassure you, if there are topics where you're like, oh, crumbs, I'm not sure. I'm not actually sure if Brook Learn has a gender topic, but they have loads of free resources, free training modules that you can go and do and brush up your subject knowledge, because you don't need to be a sexpert to teach RSE. We've got Google. We can Google the 15 methods of contraception. We can Google the things we're not sure about. And also, don't get too bogged down in the knowledge and understanding. You really don't need to be a sexpert, because it is also the skills and the attitudes and values. But Brook Learn is there to help you. It's there to help your less experienced colleagues, to do signpost them to the Brook Learn modules to brush up on their teaching skills. Out of interest, do you think scare stories work for behaviour change? And this is a really tricky one at the moment because of the sort of backlash from the Ofsted report and all the sexual harassment stuff. I've seen some really shockingly bad practice going on in schools about how they're reacting and responding to this. So broadly, we're saying no for this, and I absolutely would agree with you. There is so many scary materials in PSHE that are aiming to address, stop kids from making mistakes by scaring them out of it, and it's not trauma informed. It's not okay to share these shocking, scary materials. It has no effect on behavior change in the long term. It might have a short-term sort of knee-jerk thing, but no long-term effect. Also, there's consent issues, there's power issues going on there. Please don't share diseased genital pics, especially because that is, many STIs are symptomless. The kid's left with the message, oh, if my bits don't look as bad as the picture Sir or Miss showed us, I'm okay, I don't need to go and get tested, when they absolutely do if they have had unprotected sex with somebody else. So, do critique your materials to get the young people to feedback on the materials you use. There's a whole TikTok sub-trend around the consent cup of tea video. They're a bit over that now, everybody. So, do bear that in mind. Always check that you're not trying to scare pupils. It's not an ethical way to go about it. And again, this brings me nicely on to my next point. In the RSE guidance, there are 30 laws that you are expected to be able to teach young people. I've been working in this field for 20 years. I know some of the laws, but not all of them. So a suggested reframe, so you don't need to get bogged down too much in the law, is away from is it legal to is it right? Is that an ethical way to behave? Relating it back to the taking care of me, taking care of you, having an equal say, learning as we go. It can just disrupt some of that law complication. And yes, some of it will be illegal, and we, where it's obvious, we can clarify that. But sometimes there are these grey areas, and it'll depend on the Crown Prosecution Service, depend if you found out. So reframing it to ethical can really help. The other thing I see a lot of in schools is myths, teachers mentioning myths. We don't want to mention myths because we accidentally reinforce the myth. There's always one kid in the class who's like, oh, Miss said that, it's got to be true. And Miss was maybe trying to disrupt the myth, but has accidentally reinforced it. So if a kid brings you a myth, absolutely kill it. But if you could, be careful with your true or falses and things like that, because there are some myths that are refusing to die. And then the other thing is around debates. Don't phrase things as debates. It's very, very polarizing. We want open and honest conversations that advance human dignity and rights. We do not want polarized debates and someone trying to win. A colleague of mine says, listen to learn, not listen to win, which I really love. Also, constantly critique gender. As I've already said, I could do hours on this anyway, and I've got about 8 minutes left. No, 4 minutes. Right, speed up, Alice. But do constantly critique gender. And this piece of graffiti summarised it all for me. We've got to talk all of this stuff through with our young people. Right, I'm rattling on. The agenda materials, I've made a little body here, but the power of silver foil or pipe cleaners for a whole school, doing it in form time, anywhere. Conversations will be had about bodies, about feelings. There's loads of different ways you can use silver foil or pipe cleaners to spark conversations. It's distancing because it'll be kids talking in a way that they ordinarily wouldn't talk because they've got something to fiddle with, something to play with. So if you can bring in any tools like that to spark conversations, it's really powerful. Right, on to my favourite bit now. Object-based learning. What's this? I mean, you'll probably know because you're all PSHE teachers. I did a training for at a special schools conference on Thursday, and of 60 people, only one person knew what it was. Any ideas? Hopefully you can still see me and my slides. So one person straight away got it. Other people are maybe hedging their bets. But this is object-based learning. So using an object to spark a conversation. What is this? What's it used for? What do we know about it? How do we feel about it? Objects are so good for that distancing. Like with the silver foil, if you can distance the learning and then give them something to focus on. So you are correct. It is a clitoris. It is an iceberg. So what you see externally is not the same as what is internally. because of time, I can't go into a huge amount more detail, but it's been erased and omitted from the curriculum. And it really does show you that, you know, you guys are PSHE teachers and some of you didn't know what it was. Sourdough, love it. So I'm going to move it on, but do find out more. There's a whole documentary about the clitoris, which I'll share on Twitter with the hashtag, so you can go and learn more about it later. But object-based learning is so powerful. I've got crocheted vulvas, I've got lots of historical objects, I use you know, all the contraception or the menstrual products. You know, you can do all sorts of different things, having an object, using statements or quotes or magazine cuttings, all sorts of things. Use an object to spark that conversation. Okay, I am coming to the end. Don't panic, people. We're getting there. But yeah, Play-Doh is so useful. Objects are so useful. I do Feel Good Jenga all the time. That's a brilliant one to get form teachers and things to do, where it's got sentence starters to get conversations going about relationships or friendships. I use Duplo to write things on and blocks and build things. Just get creative, have fun with it, and it's just a lovely way of getting those conversations going as they are doing stuff. Just some quick signposting for other resources that I love, apart from my own book, obviously. You know, you guys know about the PSHE Association and Brooke, but the agenda materials. For young people, under 13, I would always signpost amaze.org. For 14 plus, I would signpost Bish and Scarlettine and the Brooke website, and NHS Choices is very good too. So these are sort of sex education websites where you can signpost young people to go and find more information about whatever it is they're looking at. And then Brilliant Questions About Growing Up and Sex Ed for Grown-Ups are two of my favourite books for professionals at the moment. And for young people, the Brilliant Questions is good, but it can also be useful for professionals to look up the right answer. Okay, so what emoji best reflects the RSE you want for your young people? I've got 2 more slides after this and I am done, promise. So what do we want? We hopefully want it different to what our own experiences were. And we have to sort of, yeah, take some time to reflect on that. We want to make it different for the next generation. So someone's got families in there, hearts, smiley faces. What else? Fist bump, party time. So broadly, these feel like more positive emojis. The sex nerd emoji is my favorite. Absolutely. We want positive experiences for our young people. And you are the guys who do go out and do that. You have the power to go and make it different for that next generation, to reverse your own, hopefully, negative experiences, process all that, and make it different for the next generation. So, you know, you guys are amazing for what you do. And, you know, you are making a difference in the classroom all of the time. So coming to a close, how was that for you? Appreciate it was a whistle-stop tour on a Saturday morning, but how was it? I've got one more capture of information from you guys and then I am shutting up. Ah, that's nice. Thank you. And if you need any help or support, contact me on Twitter at Alice Hoyle PSHE, or email me alice.t.hoyle@gmail.com, and I can help you. Love a bit of object-based learning. Always need more time. Honestly, I could talk for days about all of this stuff. So brilliant. Right, I am going to move it on because I'm now 2 minutes over and it's not fair on the next person. But just one take-home message, one thing you've captured in this half an hour together that you are going to take, maybe do differently. Because I always have this thing about learning rabbits. If you try and catch 2 rabbits at once, you will catch neither. And I've sort of gone on a bit of a meander with you this morning. But what's the one thing you're going to take home from this session or take home? You probably are home. You probably sat there in your pajamas and scare tactics don't work. Yeah, I cannot say that enough. And tell your colleagues as well, and tell the head who's doing the scary assembly. So Object-based learning is brilliant. Look at the Sex and History website as well, because we use historical objects. So we've got like chastity belts and foot binding shoes and all sorts. And the kids find it very safe and distancing because we're talking about the past, but then we relate it to a modern context. In the British Museum, there's the earliest piece of revenge porn ever, which is a statue that a king made a really ugly statue of a woman, and then he paraded it around. Outrageous, but a lot can be talked about with revenge porn and things. So yeah, and buy my book because that's got everything in it. Mine and Esther's book, 200 plus activities. So it's all good. Right, that is me done. I am zipping now, so I will stop sharing. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. Enjoy the rest of your morning, and yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alice. That was absolutely fantastic. I knew it would be, but like every time I hear you speak, I come away with more and more things. And I just like everything around safer spaces, creating a safe space, also checking in with colleagues, making sure colleagues are comfortable, and the scare tactics things. Yeah, I'm going to take that back literally on Monday. So I just think everything you say is so inspirational and so informative. So thank you so, so much for speaking this morning.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your morning.
Thank you. Okay, so we're now going to go back to Brett from Pupil Progress because I think we've solved the technical gremlins, and he's going to speak to us about the system they've got over at Pupil Progress.
Perfect. Thanks very much. We should see a screen share. Perfect. I've literally got 2 minutes. I'm going to cut right to the chase. Fantastic conversations. I'm loving the fact my daughter's 16 currently, so it's incredible to learn that we're getting such, skilled experts into education. So couldn't be more happy that we're supporting this event so this can happen. If you are delivering a PSHE qualification and that is across the whole entire school and you want to be able to prove the impact of that, this is where we can fit in. This is a tracking system that tracks progress for every single subject area, every single qualification. What you're looking at is if you are a PSHE lead or a subject teacher, you can actually track and monitor the progress of those particular qualifications. What you're looking at here is the level 2 NCFE cash, relationships and sex and health education. It meets the exact requirements of the course itself by typing in whether the student has actually completed each assignment and then collating the actual amount of required marks and then telling you whether they've actually reached the requirements to pass that course. But what's most important is you also get individual student reports that you can share with line managers, with the pupils specifically, showing them how they're performing and how they're moving forward in their qualification. So it makes it really, really powerful, especially conversations at parents' evening. What I think is really important aspect of this is feeling in control and feeling like you're on top of actually the strategic delivery and also delivering on the benefit and impact of delivering such important qualifications. So if you want to be able to go to the analysis, you can actually literally show the performance of each one of the qualifications you're delivering. If you are a whole school lead or you know of someone that is a whole school lead, you have the ability to see what's happening across the whole entire school because every single subject area has a tracking system that allows you to add tests at question level analysis. And you as a PSHE teacher will be able to see what's going on across a specific subject area. So if I click on analysis and I go to subject analysis, I'll be able to see exactly what's happening across all of the areas or all of the qualifications that have been delivered in PSHE, and it will tell me the statistics, and therefore you can show the impact of that qualification. All you need to do is go to pupilprogress.com. You can trial the software for 4 weeks. If you are a Pixel school, you can literally click on Get Started Now. Use this system at no cost. I'm typing in the name of a school that I know is a Pixel school. So if I type in these guys, when I click continue, that will come up. We've pre-uploaded every Pixel school, and then you'll be able to choose your subject, which I presume would be PSHE, and another subject as well, because you do get 2 subject areas. Click continue, be able to register, and again that will be at no cost. So if you are a Pixel school, do take advantage of our amazing offer. And if you do think it's of use to you, please reach out, pupilprogress.com, or email me directly at brett@pupilprogress.com. Thanks for fitting me back in as well. Major help. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, Brett. And I think as PSHE grows and more people are looking at assessment and everything else, I think that'll be really useful for a lot of schools. So thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Great. Thanks very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Okay, so we are running very slightly behind, but I have no doubt that we'll manage to catch up. So our next speaker is Becky from What's the Debate? Becky said to me that she's now just considers herself known as What's the Debate. So we'll just call her What's the Debate if that makes her happier. And she's going to be speaking about tackling sexual harassment in schools. So welcome, Becky / What's the Debate?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm normally known as What's the Debate. Although in the school the other week I went into, they were so pleased I was back. One of the lads just went, "Yay, the porn lady's back," and I was like, "That's a new one."
It's always good to, it's a good intro, that, isn't it?
Yeah, I was like, that's fine. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. Morning, everybody. So yeah, like I said, like Jeff said, I'm Becky. I'm from What's the Debate. I'm called What's the Debate. Very similar to kind of what Alice was talking about earlier, is actually to kind of reconstruct the word debate, and actually that we don't want to have these debates in kind of, especially when we're talking about very sensitive, very serious subjects, that actually we want to have those open, honest conversations, but also bring in those life skills that really talk about kind of that critical thinking, that problem solving, respectful communication, and think about kind of like that creative thinking and decision making as well. So, like I said, my name is Becky. I've been working in the field around sexual violence, exploitation and domestic abuse for the last 16 years now. I previously worked for Bernardo's. I was a CSU coordinator for them. And then I've also worked for a women's aid charity where I was manager for the children's services. My passion, which is always really weird to say, is that my passion is targeting and tackling sexual violence and sexual harassment and domestic abuse. I've got lived experience of that as well. And it is something that throughout all of these years that I've been working with, obviously I've been doing a lot of one-to-one support and very long-term support of young people as well, but also a lot of that education support within schools. And I think that relationship and sex education can be a brilliant safeguarding tool against all of these subjects as well. So just very similar to kind of what Alice was saying earlier as well around those safe spaces. Also, I'm going to be talking about sexual harassment and tackling sexual harassment. And I'm going to start with some of those things that we already know that has been in the media through very much looking at what the Ofsted report and everything has been as well. So please don't kind of like, please do look after yourselves. I'm chatting around this bit. And if you need to kind of come back and watch it later in the recording and thing, that is absolutely fine as well. So what we obviously already know is through Ofsted's report or through all of the stories that have come out from Everyone's Invited. And so we do know a lot of that kind of aspect there as well. So very much that we know that young people are very much becoming around unwanted explicit pictures and videos, around that sexist name calling and that unwanted touching as well. A biggest thing obviously that came out is that young people are seeing that it's normal. Children, young people don't see the point of challenging it and reporting it as harmful behaviour, and they just see it as a very normalised behaviour, very much with a lot of around bullying and things as well. Some of those things that I do want to bring out around the report and some other aspects that have come through as well is obviously that we know that children and young people that are within the LGBTQ plus community also have a higher disproportion when it comes to sexual violence and sexual harassment, as do young people that are Black and other minorities as well, to have huge kind of high disproportion. The Girl Guardian reports found that actually Black girls were 4 times more likely to suffer sexual harassment than white girls. And we need to kind of look into that, because obviously the Ofsted report also said that the LGBTQ plus students were also then being exposed to a lot of physical assault as well, linked in with their sexual harassment. And when we're talking about obviously sexual harassment, we're talking about their sexualized language and sexualized bullying. We obviously then really need to bring in and said that that is also then bringing in the homophobic language, homophobic bullying, racist language as well. So it's things that we really need to break down, and we need to kind of look at very individual responses and how it is affecting each individual person as well. excuse me. So we know from Ofsted's report that obviously there was lots of different forms coming, not just as the sexist name calling, but other lots of non-contact forms as well. Lots of face-to-face ones, very much online and through social media. And obviously a lot of that contact forms as well, which then is very much bringing into those sexual assault of any kind and a lot of that unwanted touching. A big thing that obviously Ofsted did say is that we need to make the assumption that it's happening in all schools and it's happening everywhere. And also a very much one that they did say, which is what I kind of link a lot of my kind of resources and teaching and training on, is that they did say that it's a cultural issue and it's very much about attitudes and behaviours becoming normalised in schools and colleges. But not just in schools and colleges, it's been normalised with young people in their kind of world. This is something I kind of like to show young people themselves as well, but also in a lot of my training, we talk about the window of our world and our influences. And you can see there that obviously we've got things like our relationships and our values, we've got our education, our family, very much like our work experience. It all shapes us and our influences and where they come from, where we get our information from, which then obviously then links into kind of how we see the world and what's going on. And when we look at things like sexual violence, sexual harassment and domestic abuse, again, very much linking into what kind of Alice was saying that around, we don't want to talk about these myths because actually they're the myths that have been around the longest. Those are the myths that we hear that has not changed in the 16 years I've been working in this field. There is still so much of those kind of myths there, and we need to tackle them in a very different way because they're out there, they're in those influences. And a big thing that is missing from this kind of window of the world, especially when we look at children and young people, is obviously the media and the social media, but then we can use that to help having these conversations as well. But if we look at this window of the world and if we link this to obviously things like ACEs and that contextual safeguard and the risk outside the home, we do know then that we have got some young people that have got the belief that this is normal. We can see that from the Ofsted report. We know that obviously if we've also got some young people who's in window of the world, if they haven't got a safe home, if they haven't got those safe people kind of saying to them and mirroring what that healthy relationships looks like, we also know then, you know, that they're going to have that belief of use and tolerance of violence against family members, very much around that belief of men and women are not equal, they don't have the same rights. So it is going to feed into those stereotypes of masculinity and femininity. It's going to link into seen as that some levels of violence are seen as normal, very much around a lack of awareness of their own rights and those collective rights as well. And also kind of really reinforcing those rigid roles as well. We also know in kind of a bigger picture that we're going to have, obviously, we know that there are going to be organisations there around, you know, we know the gender differences around policies and all of those kind of things as well, very much around the attitude of boys will be boys. And we know that is still going on. I was in the school the other day and they said actually that the girls were looking forward to prom, and it was an all-girls school, and the school had said that they can't invite boys because boys is a safeguarding issue, and actually we don't want to be talking about that. We want to be moving around that. Boys aren't a safeguarding issue, so we very much need to kind of change that attitude and look at all of that aspect as well. And also a big thing is that access to social media and, like I said, the forms of online violence as well. And so these are the things that we kind of really need to tackle. When we look at sexual harassment, we can't just do, like Jess said earlier, we can't just do that one-off assembly. We really need to break things down, and we really need to kind of tackle a lot of things from the smaller level down as well. And when we look at kind of, like we said, these myths and stereotypes, yes, we don't like to talk about them that much, but I do a lot of work with young people. And this was just literally 2 weeks ago where I asked them what they thought, all those different stereotypes of girls and how they see themselves. These were some of the things that we brought up and they brought up as well. And you can see very much around this is what they thought around girls. I'll just give you a minute to kind of read that. And then this is what they said around boys. So there is still very much those different kinds of things that they hear. They still see in how very much around jobs, roles, and all of those kind of things. So we really do need to kind of tackle this and from, like I said, a very different level and really break all of those different things down. So how we can do this is very much through those curriculum-based activities. And I like to do them through those developing those life skills, teaching about safe behaviour, and then challenging the social and cultural norms and promote those equal relationships. So a central part of school-based violence prevention involves working with children and young people directly to look at some of the root causes, really kind of look at that bigger picture and try and understand what is going on as well. So it's beneficial in the long term, and we want to include those skills very much around how to recognise violence, to stay safe, to resolve conflicts in a very non-violent way as well, and then also linking in around managing emotions and how to access support and also kind of support someone else who may be experiencing violence. So to be a good friend as well and look out for our friends and be a positive bystander is so important. There's a lot of kind of so much more than those one-off ways. And yes, we know assemblies aren't great, but actually kind of doing that whole assembly so everyone's got that bigger picture, and then also really looking down and kind of breaking that down as well. So yes, you can do those whole call assemblies, but then very much like the example that Jess showed earlier was brilliant. That's some of the stuff that I do. I go in and do an assembly, and then I do more targeted work within the different classrooms and smaller groups as well, so that everyone's got the bigger picture, and then we can really break all of that down. All of these kind of things that I said, those developing life skills, which is very much why we kind of changed that focus around debate, because we're really looking at then those cognitive, social and emotional skills, how to cope with everyday life. And as we saw of those reports, for our young people, everyday life, especially within schools, but outside of school as well, unfortunately does involve sexual harassment, and it does involve a lot of those sexualized behaviors and sexualized language. So we want to have those developed life skills, and like I said, and having those conversations where we are problem solving, we are doing those critical thinkings, we're allowing them to make those decisions, being very creative, having those relationship skills, learning from others, learning different values and views from each other as well, and also having our own self-awareness and empathy. And coping with all those stress and emotions. You know, being a young person is hard enough without having to deal with all of the kind of sexual violence and all the sexualized language and everything out there. Or I say to the young people when I go into schools, I would hate to be a young person now. I did not have social media and smartphones when I was in school. And so all of that kind of, all those pressures and things. So being able to kind of deal with all of those emotions as well. If we develop those life skills, then obviously these skills will allow children to very much manage those emotions, deal with conflict and communicate effectively, very much also in those non-aggressive ways, and reduce the risk of violent behaviour. They can also improve obviously schools in performance, and obviously then more attainment within education, which obviously then really helps schools out as well. Then obviously if we're talking about teaching children safe behaviour, so obviously this includes the ability to kind of recognise the situations where abuse or violence can happen, very much understanding how to avoid potentially risky situations and where to find that help and support. Also looking at kind of being a positive bystander, obviously not putting yourself in risky situations, knowing that being a bystander doesn't mean you actually have to get in and physically intervene, all of those kinds of things so they can keep themselves safe as well. It's also then we can address those risk factors, then also bringing in things like obviously such as use around drugs and alcohol, and how obviously these can all link into those high risk factors as well. And then challenge those social, cultural norms and obviously equal relationships. You saw those 2 Slidos that I did with my young people there as well. And it is very much looking at gender, sexual orientation, religion, ethnicity, disability. And we know that can all increase the risk of bullying and violence as well. And we kind of need to challenge some of those harmful norms. But very much in that linking into those developing life skills in that very respectful, open, honest, for critical thinking, developing empathy kind of way as well, which is why we're very much around having those very discussion-based and those scenario-based work really does help. We also kind of need to look in things around, you know, preventing and having that kind of tolerance, and also looking at kind of, you know, being able to stand up and talk about things as well. A big thing that I use around this is those scenario-based working, but also we're looking, go back into that kind of window of that world and frame of reference. Use a young person's frame of reference with them, have those discussions, find out what is it they're watching. Some of the best conversations that I've actually had with young people are things that are going on with Hollyoaks, or, you know, sex education, brilliant on Netflix. Having those discussions in younger schools, you know, we talk about Wreck-It Ralph and Ralph Breaks the Internet is a brilliant way to talk about kind of those healthy friendships and healthy relationships. Bring in their influences, bring in their world, have those discussions with them. Really talk about that and really break it down and find out kind of, you know, what does that mean to them? How do you think those characters feel? It's another brilliant scenario case work with them. And it's also allowing them from scenarios that they can kind of talk about people, they can talk about characters without kind of feeling like you're talking about them and we're bringing judgment upon them as well. So it is very much, you know, bring in their world, talk about them, find out what they're watching. We know that there are shows out there that very much, you know, make the headlines already. We're seeing it with the new Pixar movie with Turning Red. You know, we've already had some people say this is brilliant and that we can have these conversations and talk about periods. And then there's on the flip side other people going, we wish I had this warning and it's disgusting that these are carrying these out. And actually, you know, our young people are seeing that. So we need to be able to have these conversations with them about those programs and talk about them and be able to really kind of break them down. Very much like with Alice, this is a bit of a whistle stop tour as well. So I'm just going to move on to things like very much bringing in that whole school approach. And it's so important that we can do that. Obviously, it really brings in to help create that awareness that the school community and culture does not accept violence. When we look at sexual violence as well, it's also very much around looking at tackling values and not just values of the young people, values of our staff and parents and the community as a whole as well. And the big thing I find with a whole school approach, especially around these aspects, is also bringing the young people and include them. I'm working with a brilliant charity down in London that are looking at Lewisham schools. So if you are a school in Lewisham, please do reach out to me on Twitter because we may be able to help you with this. But we are going in and we are working with young people. We are doing those whole school assemblies, but then we're doing smaller workshops. But then what we're also asking for is for young people who would like to be ambassadors within their school that are really going to do that whole school approach and really look at tackling sexual violence and sexual harassment within their schools. This is where I come in and I do some more in-depth training with the young people. I've got a peer mentoring program and we go through all of that aspect as well. Really look at what those roles are. And one of the schools that I'm working with that has just gone through all of that training with myself, they're now looking at kind of doing display boards. Some of the young people are actually also creating their own workshops and doing that for the younger year groups and things like that. So very much bringing in those, include those young people, get them to use their voice and raise that with them as well, because that is so, so important. Again, this is their world, so we need to learn from them and find out what it is from them and how we can work together with them as well. That's kind of pretty much me in a nutshell. Very much do kind of reach out to me on kind of Twitter or anything like that, and just kind of show these are some of the things from those young people that have been doing some of this work with, when we have been those takeaways of what they can talk about and what we have been learning, and having those discussions in that way as well. And that's just me there.
Thank you so much, Becky. That was so useful. And I think obviously there's a lot of work to be done in schools around these issues, but I think you've mentioned some really important points around like bystander behaviour and also culture amongst staff. Like I think it's easy for us to say that students who are involved in sexual harassment, either as the perpetrator or the victim, are people we need to focus on, but actually it's so much more than that. It's everybody around the outside of that person and that situation.
Yeah. And it's so much more because actually a lot of young people don't really kind of know some of those behaviours, so they don't realise that they are potentially being a perpetrator, because like you said, it's so normal and it's seen as banter, which I hate that
Absolutely.
word. It's all kind of
Absolutely.
seen as that, and it's breaking them down and realising actually what these behaviours are, and it's not. Except, you know, a lot of my young people, especially when I'm doing those groups, are going, oh, actually I didn't realise then that means I've been sexually harassing my friend. Like, if you break it down
absolutely.
that way,
I think, yeah, and it's so important to break it down like you've said it, and just a really informative session. Thank you so much.
Not a problem.
Okay, so we're going to go to another of our sponsors now. We're going to hear from Sabrina from Teachers Love Stationery.
Hi, thank you for having me, Jess. Okay, so hi, my name's Sabrina. I'm the co-founder and co-owner of Teachers Love Stationery Club, along with my husband. And we started up this company because I'm really mad about stationery. And as a couple, we have subscription boxes we buy for ourselves. And it's really nice getting a monthly treat through the post. It's like buying a little present for yourself. So I've looked at stationery subscription boxes that are already existing, but they're not really aimed at teachers. And some of the stuff is quite high end and not really appropriate for classroom use. So I decided to start this business based on, you know, having stationery that's appropriate for teachers. It's really like pretty or fun to use, but is appropriate for classrooms and is useful. It's not just going to sit in a drawer gathering dust. You're actually going to be able to use it, whether that's at home or in school. So I'd like to do an unboxing for you today. I've got one of our boxes here, and as you can see, it's approximately A4 sized, and it's about 2 centimeters in depth. So it will fit through your post box while you're at work, and you won't come home to one of those annoying "sorry you weren't here" cards from the post office. I'm just going to move my camera down so you can see what's inside. So this is, I'm going to unbox our March box, which went out this month. And the theme for this month, we have a different theme each month. The theme was afternoon tea. And personally, this is one of my favourite boxes. So when you first subscribe, you will receive a little welcome gift of a canvas pencil case personalised with your name. And yeah, you can, once you subscribe, just send us your personalisation details and we'll make sure that that's there in your first box for you. And here is the contents of our afternoon tea box. There was some little packets of Post-it notes with a cute little cake on it. 3 scented pens. So this one is a sort of brownish goldy coloured ink with a cookie scent. This is a sky blue ink with a vanilla scent. And this is a brown ink with a milk tea scent. And we included a little dot grid notebook, time for creativity. I don't know if you can really see the dots in there, but it's a dot grid book, a bit like a bullet journal with a contents page at the beginning. It's handy for making all your little notes and laying them out however you want to. Matching washi tape with the same print as what's on the book, which is great for your notebook or your teacher planner and decorating whatever you like. A Faber-Castell branded highlighter, and we often include like little packets of vinyl stickers, and we've got 2 in this month's box, and they're really fun. My pupils like to get them just as general reward stickers, and they like to stick them on the front of their books. There's lots of sweets and cakes and things like that, so they like to collect them, put them on the front of their exercise books. And of course, we can't do an afternoon tea box without sending you a little treat as well. So as a little extra, there's a little coconut ring cake and a nice cup of Earl Grey tea, so you can have a little luxury at your break time. Lastly, we often include reward stickers and reward postcards and stuff. And this month, obviously tea themed, your work is quality. Again, something nice to give to your students. Okay. The other thing I wanted to showcase today was that we have started a new range of teacher planners as well. So please check out our online shop for those. They come with a protective plastic cover because I have spilled tea all over my teacher planner before, but this is wiped clean. And corner protectors to keep your planner looking really nice all year round. And there's a big white space here because we include free personalization. So we have 4 different fonts to choose from and lots of different colors of vinyl. So we will personalize your planner for you, and that is included for free. So I'm just going to show you some of the inside of the planner. We've got a little pocket here, and we had a focus group inform us of what they wanted in their teacher planner. They wanted something that was functional and didn't have too much excess, just the sections they used. And what the general consensus came to be was, here are some of the main sections. We've got 12 pages of monthly overviews, so you can plan month by month and fill in the date as suits you, depending on where you're located. Different school years start at different times. Big notes section, so there's loads of pages of Cornell notes style and lined notes pages, plenty of these. And then, of course, just the main planning section, we have week per view available, which is this page here. And we also have page per day, because personally, I prefer page per day. I do part-time, so I wouldn't want to waste pages. And again, you can fill it in starting the school year when you want, using as many weeks as you want, which was requested by, teachers from different parts of the country, and, part-time teachers as well preferred that. And lastly, we've got a nice big assessment section at the back to keep your assessment records. So it's a simplified, slimmed down planner. As you can see, it's not very bulky and heavy. It's slimmed down. It's got everything you need, but none of the sort of excess bits that you might not use. And for the week per view planner, that starts at £20, and the day per view page, starts at £22.50. We also have matching accessory packs, so matching washi tape and decorative stickers to match the cover you choose. So these are two of our covers, the Cherry Blossom and the Midnight Galaxy. There's 4 more designs you can choose from, all come in both versions. And as I said, you can get the matching accessory packs for £10. So we think that it's quite reasonably priced, and we hope that you'll have a look at those. So to go back to our subscription boxes, they are £12.50 per box, and you can choose from monthly, bi-monthly or quarterly. And when you subscribe using the code on the screen, PSHE10, you can get £2 off your first box if you subscribe, or 10% off any item in our online shop, and that includes our teacher planners. There's lots of personalised items, pens, stickers, all sorts of other bits and pieces in our shop, so do have a look. And yeah, I think that's just about everything I've covered there. So thank you very much for listening. And yeah, PSHE10 is your discount code today to get money off in our online shop and money off your first subscription box if you do choose to subscribe. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. And I can definitely say that the boxes are just absolutely fantastic. So I will also kind of push that as well. I just think they're incredible. And I love that everything's different themes as well. So
Excellent.
Thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you like them.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Okay, so we're now going to move on to a bit of an interview, a bit of a conversation with Dr. Emily Seti. Dr. Seti is a lecturer in criminology at the University of Surrey, and she conducts research with young people to look at understanding their experiences of sex and relationships in the contemporary era, so especially including digital and online environments, and then looks at how the issues and challenges that come with that can be addressed through education. So Alice referred to the review that was done, which Emily was part of. So welcome, Emily.
Hi, Jess. Yeah, and everyone. Nice to be here.
Okay, so let's get started. So the first question that we've got, and these questions have come in partially, like I've written some of them, but also come from people on Twitter. So as a profession, we've obviously had a lot of change to guidance around RSE, and especially with the change to statutory status, and therefore also what we need to be delivering. So do you think that RSE is fit for purpose in its current format?
Wow, yeah, big question. Yeah, so I guess on the face of it, it's such a positive move that it's now on a statutory footing, right? It means that young people's rights to RSE are being upheld in law. And I think broadly speaking, the guidance to schools is emphasizing a right to comprehensive relationships and sex education, and it's got kind of quite positive narratives in there as well, which is all great stuff. But then I think of the reality then of how that gets translated on the ground, right, and what's actually going on in schools, okay, is where things, I guess, get a bit more kind of complicated. And I think the guidance, perhaps quite rightly, leaves quite a great deal of latitude to schools. But there is some tensions within the guidance, okay, like between being comprehensive and upholding rights and equality, but these kind of vague notions of age appropriateness and, you know, the stuff around LGBT teaching. And if I'm honest, I've kind of got this impression that the government is more keen to kind of avoid some of the controversies and challenges, sort of please everybody, as it were, or kind of avoid like antagonizing people, all these different sort of interest groups. And then in practice, it's kind of left for schools to join the dots. And I think that's a really challenging position that schools have been put in. And I do think schools should have discretion, right? I'm not saying that the government should be really prescriptive. They know their pupils, they know the cultures that they're dealing with, right? But I think for me, my biggest problem is that while RSE is statutory, it's not being professionalized enough, right? So you've got these amazing organizations on the ground, and they know how to deliver RSE on complex and challenging topics. They know how to connect with young people on this and make it resonate and have impact. But schools don't necessarily have all the resources, the money to be bringing in those organizations, right? Not on a kind of sustainable, regular footing. But I think we also know that it's not enough just to keep bringing outside organizations in. Stuff does actually need to be going on kind of within the school culture as well. So in that sense, I do think we need to see more professionalization of RSE. Like, we wouldn't just say bus in the nearest available teacher to teach maths if they knew nothing about maths, and then saying to that teacher, oh, look, all your pupils have failed, like you're not very good at teaching maths. That's such an unfair expectation, isn't it? And I think likewise, these really complex topics to do with sex and relationships, we just bringing in teachers that have got time to teach it. And then we're saying, oh, look, like none of the problems are being solved for young people and it's not having any impact. Okay, well, why would it, right? It's really difficult to teach kids these topics. So I do think, yeah, professionalization and joining those dots are really important.
I completely agree. And certainly, like, I think the guidance is a great start, like you've said, but I think, like I kind of referred to right at the start of the event, was everybody becomes a teacher of PSHE and as an extension of that, RSHE. And if we're not training and qualifying staff to be able to deliver that, then really the guidance may as well not be there, because we're not actually able to deliver a quality of education for students. And like you said, you know, we wouldn't do that. We wouldn't do it in primary. You wouldn't just pull in somebody and be like, oh, can you just teach this? Like, you don't know what you're talking about, but can you just teach it? And I think it also links to a couple of things Alice said around it. If you don't know it from an external point of view, if it hasn't been professionalized for you, then you're just expected to deliver based on your own understanding, which with relationships and sex topics will generally be from your own personal experience. And that creates a real problem for teachers in creating that distance that's so important, like Alice talked about earlier. So yeah, really interesting points about professionalization.
And because we're talking about values often, aren't we, with sex and relationships? So if you're teaching about that, I think there's a distinction, say, between being a facilitator of young people being able to figure out their values and navigating all these kind of tension points in relationships, versus this notion of imparting your own values as the educator. And typically in education, it's the adult has the knowledge and the expertise and needs to get young people to that point. Like, okay, this is what maths is, this is what science is, right? Let's educate the pupil to be able to understand that. Whereas actually in RSE, the skill, the professional skill, is about how can we get young people figuring things out, developing value systems, solving problems. It's an empowering process, actually, but that in itself is difficult education to deliver, right? And I think it's interesting, like you say, the guidance is not worth the paper it's written on if people don't know how to deliver it. Fantastic that the guidance saying, we need to connect, you know, different sorts of behaviors and stuff to like gender and sexuality and inequality and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, amazing. I'd 100% say we need to do that. But how? How do you do that? And that's the problem, isn't it? And we're just saying, teacher, figure out how to do that with a class of 30 kids who have probably all got their own different perspectives and issues. Good luck to you. Oh, look, you haven't had any impact. Like, how awful is your teaching? I mean, it's setting people up to fail. And I think it's really unfair, actually.
Okay, thank you so much. So the next question takes it a bit almost broader, I suppose. It's a question about culture. So there's a focus, especially since the Everyone's Invited site was set up and the revelations that kind of came from that, and also the Ofsted review and it talks a lot about creating a culture in schools which promotes respect and challenging behaviours which are problematic. How do you think that building that culture can actually be achieved, especially in a large school?
Yeah, so I really am interested in taking this kind of cultural perspective on this stuff. Like the review for the Department for Education on harmful sexual behaviour in schools, I'm currently kind of doing with a team of others, is really framing it in that way. So we're talking about harmful sexual behaviour and cultures, right? So these behaviours and cultures kind of coming together in that sense. And I think it's really important to like hammer that home, because often, like with harmful sexual behaviors or whatever we want to call it, peer on peer abuse, you know, there's so many different kind of terms like floating around out there. We tend to think, oh, okay, like let's try to identify who's at risk of doing this, right? Who's at risk of perpetrating it, who's at risk of being a victim, and then deal with those dynamics and what's going on for those kids. And yeah, absolutely 100%, we do need to look at kind of individual needs and figure out, right, like how can we help protect kids and all the rest of it. But we've also got to look, and I think I got the last kind of bit of what your speaker, your previous speaker before the kind of sponsor speaker was saying about some of this, and you know, looking at harmful sexual behavior as ranging along a continuum, right? And that's not to equate different behaviors in terms of seriousness or impact or anything like that, but it's to say that it emerges from the same culture. And that culture isn't just about young people's peer cultures and what can go on for them, but it's also about the cultures that the adults around them are upholding and perpetuating, and what's going on systemically and structurally within the school itself, right? And in that sense, you know, this whole school approach aspect is so important. And I know it's a buzzword that gets floated around, and like, what does that even mean? So it is a really difficult one, but it is about this idea of like, you know, if you had a lesson on consent and what's okay and what's not, and you break down all the gender norms and expectations and so on that like surround all of this, and you do some really great work with young people on that, but then they leave the classroom and I don't know, like someone says something sexist to them, a teacher, right? Maybe inadvertently, I don't know. I'm not like, we've all got these attitudes and values, exactly like as you were saying earlier. So if it's not being upheld in every single aspect of school life, the kids, and I know for a fact when I've done research with kids, they say, yeah, you're told in a lesson that you need to respect people and sexism and blah, blah, blah. And then, but my teacher the other day said something really sexist about what I was wearing. And you think, okay, and it looks really contradictory. So it's about all the policies and procedures that are going on within the schools. And we need to look at what is normalized and tolerated. Like the other speaker was talking about, like gender-based sexualized bullying, there can be really fatalistic attitudes to some of that stuff, and it's not being challenged and it's not being dealt with, okay? And so we need to look at, right, what values are being upheld within the school, what expectations of pupils are there from the top to the bottom, and is that helping or hindering progress to a more positive peer relationship culture, right? And we should see that as relationships, not just between the pupils, but also between the pupils and the teachers as well, but also between the teachers. So what leadership and buy-in and support is occurring within the kind of adult body of the school. And something just to say on this, that we're really trying to figure out with this review that we're doing for the Department for Education is about the distinction between school climate and school culture, okay? So school climate being about kind of immediate perceptions of safety, the number of incidents, pupils' willingness to report stuff. That's all really important, right? And we do want to kind of promote all of those aspects, but culture is something a bit different. It's about the norms and values within like the peer dynamics and the teacher dynamics that are taking place. And we use zero tolerance as an example of how tricky the interconnection between school culture and school climate is. So like, yeah, absolutely, there should be zero tolerance for all the behaviors along the continuum. That's really important for like encouraging pupils to like know what's right and wrong, and willingness to report, general perceptions of safety. Absolutely. If you're allowing gender and sexualized cyberbullying to kind of go beneath the surface of things, that's not going to build confidence to report the more serious issues. So absolutely zero tolerance is important, but at the same time, we want to avoid just shutting down and suppressing behavior. Okay, so there's no point, say, I don't know, a boy shouts out something in the classroom that's sexist, right? Okay, that boy needs to go, like, leave the classroom, right? He's in trouble. Okay, great. That's zero tolerance. You can tick that box. But there's no point sort of doing that if you're not then going to take the opportunity to explore why it's wrong and to address some of the beliefs and the values and the norms that are actually causing that behavior. And we think a more sort of collaborative approach with pupils, where we bring them in and we say, okay, you've just used that language there. Why is that language inappropriate? How might that language be making someone feel? And why might we express language in that way? Why might we behave in that way? Let's break it down and actually start addressing some of the root causes. Otherwise, that boy is just going to be standing outside the classroom, probably feeling a bit embarrassed and that he's been treated unfairly. Resentment can build, and actually you might be making the problem worse. I know, like, I've spoken to groups of kids who are saying like, oh, you're not allowed to say anything anymore, we just get told off for everything these days, and their attitudes are not being addressed. So actually, yes, use some of this stuff. So we are doing zero tolerance, but we're using it as an opportunity to look at culture and breaking that culture down. So yeah, 100% for us, that is what we're hammering home.
I think you've raised so many really interesting points. I think just to follow up on that one, I think it's so important, because ultimately there could be other people who are sat in that room who heard what he said. He's sent out, they know it's wrong, but they don't actually know why it's wrong. And I think this links to what I said again right at the start, is that everyone's a teacher of PSHE. Whether you're like, I might be delivering a lesson in RE or in psychology or whatever, French, and a student could make a comment that's sexist, or a comment that is sexual harassment, and I have to be able to address that, not because I'm teaching a PSHE lesson, but because this links with relationships and sex education. And I think I think it's about us as adults understanding the fact that we are part of that culture all the time. It's not just about when we're teaching students in a PSHE session, or when we're delivering an assembly, or whatever it is. It's all the time. And I think it's really interesting what you said about the fact that students will say, they're in these sessions saying basically, you should behave this way, this is unacceptable behaviour, and then they go out into the corridor and a member of staff might say something that actually is not appropriate. And certainly, you know, I've had young people and also staff across the country report that there's still very much an attitude around well, girls shouldn't roll their skirts up because it can be distracting to boys, or girls shouldn't roll their skirts up because they're putting themselves at risk. And I think that kind of basic, like, ground level victim blaming can be really problematic. And it's something that I think comes up a lot actually in conversations around uniform. And I think maybe a conversation for another day, but there's a lot to be explored around uniform policy, and how it's worded and how it's dealt with as well. Because I agree, like, if a girl's rolling her skirt up, then that's actually sort of against the uniform policy, it's against the behaviour policy potentially. But it's about the way that that's tackled, because saying if you roll your skirt up, then you're putting yourself at risk, or, you know, boys can see everything, that's really problematic language, and it builds into a culture of, firstly, girls put themselves at risk and therefore it's their fault if something happens, but secondly, that boys are going to be kind of predatory based on that, which is also really problematic. And it creates that polarization that we spoke about earlier as well.
No, definitely. I couldn't agree more. I think, yeah, like you say, you could have a whole conversation about behavior policy, uniform policy, and what that upholds around, like, that relational dynamic. It's not just victim blaming, exactly as you say, but it's also, sex is this thing that boys do to girls, and you're setting up that transactional dynamic that feeds in to all of that kind of harmful sexual behavior culture. And absolutely, it does involve, therefore, the adults reflecting on their attitudes, beliefs and values just as much. This isn't something like the kids are getting wrong. This is actually something that's perpetuated in adult society as well, right? And I think another thing on the zero tolerance, another counterproductive impact of it, is that particularly girls, a barrier to reporting is this notion of, like, not looking like a snitch and not getting boys into trouble. And a lot of girls I speak to will say, oh yeah, you know, you're walking down the street, the corridor, boy slaps you on the bum or whatever, and you don't like it, but, like, you don't want to look like the kind of girl that would, you know, be a prude or cause a drama about that and get them into trouble. You know, if you don't, if you just accept it, the boys like you even more for that, because you look like you're a laugh, you look like the cool girl that can take it on. So if the boy says something sexist in the classroom and then he's zero tolerance, he's really punished. The girls in the room, not only are other young people not having the opportunity to learn and to reflect on their own attitudes and beliefs, the girls in the room might be like, oh my God, I'm definitely not going to report anything now, because look what happens, and it's going to antagonize the situation. So I think we do need to look at all these counterproductive impacts potentially, because it is about how does it feed into the culture among the young people. Yeah, definitely.
I mean, that seamlessly links to the next question. So with regards to that culture amongst young people, how can we promote healthy relationships between young people, especially with the online age and social media and all of the problems that can cause?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, okay, so like on the online issue, like you say yourself, with all the problems that it can cause, I think, yeah, we need to be thinking about that, and like what we actually think is happening online and what's problematic about it. And we've got to be very precise about that. I think often, and the DfE guidance kind of somewhat does this as well, perpetuates this idea that like online relationships are de facto risky and problematic, right?
Mm-hmm.
That they are causing harm, and we need to kind of address that. And in an ideal world, all those online relationships wouldn't really exist, but they do, and we've just got to kind of do damage limitation on them, right? And I think that is becoming increasingly not credible with young people, and it's probably quite a simplified way of looking at actually what's going on online, right? The reality is, and I'm probably kind of like not telling people something they don't already know, but that young people's relationships span online and offline, and there's good and bad elements to both, right? And we want to avoid like setting up this sort of dynamic of like everything that happens online is bad and offline relationships are by definition more meaningful, more virtuous, better for you psychologically or whatever. And it's like, no, that's not true. Okay. And I think we need to be breaking down with kids what are the risks and opportunities within different spaces. And that might involve us reconceiving risk. Again, it goes back to that idea of adults reflecting on some of their values and what they're bringing to the conversation. Like talking to strangers online and privacy is such an interesting example of this, because it's seen as something that's inherently risky for young people. But actually, a lot of young people I speak to feel safer actually connecting with people online that they don't know in their offline environments, right? So rather than telling kids this is risky, this isn't risky, and so on, we need to be really equipping them with the skills to navigate these different terrains and these different opportunities, right? And breaking that down with them. And like more generally, this kind of ties into what we're trying to do in this review for the Department of Education around exactly what we define as healthy relationships, okay? It tends to lend itself to a list of virtues, right? That you either do or you don't have. And we don't actually talk about what those virtues mean. So for example, we might say a healthy relationship is loving. Okay, great. But for some young people, coercive behavior in relationships can look like love. So to them, they would say, yeah, box ticked, I'm in a loving relationship. But we haven't actually spoken to them about what love is and what might look like love, but is actually coercive. So unless we're talking about what those virtues actually mean, and what skills and insights and knowledge we have to navigate those virtues, in reality, we're not actually supporting them to have healthy relationships. And we are advocating in the review to shift focus from healthy relationships to citizenship. Okay. And we're talking about sexual citizenship because it's harmful sexual behavior, but citizenship in the broader sense in terms of sex and relationships as a whole, and looking at what are some of the skills and knowledge that young people need to navigate and achieve relationships based on respect for agency, autonomy, and integrity, right? How can we make sure that our rights are upheld in our relationships, that we're upholding the rights of others, okay? We know some of this can be controversial, particularly when it comes to sexuality. We don't want to conceive of young people as like sexual citizens in that way, but it's really about, how can we actually be encouraging young people to participate in their relationships online and offline, going back to what we were saying at the beginning, based on this idea of citizenship, right? Where it's that positive vision for what can be achieved.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, actually, that, well, because I completely agree with what you said at the start. Like, we always sort of start from the start point of there's a problem and we need to fix it. And our idea of what a problem looks like is coming from our own value judgments on relationships. And I think, like, I'm 33 years old, but still I have friends who, when they meet someone online, they won't tell anybody that they met them online. They'll say, oh yeah, well, we met through a mutual friend. Well, the mutual friend was a dating website. Do you know what I mean? And there's still a lot of judgment, I think, attached to that. And if we're still doing that as adults, then we're projecting that onto young people, then that's a real problem. And I think it also potentially comes from not really understanding the platforms they're using. So I did a session with some trainee teachers a few weeks ago, and I said I download the latest social media apps so that I understand what the students are seeing. Because if I don't understand TikTok and I don't understand Snapchat, then I'm going to automatically assume it's bad, because different and other is bad because it's scary because I don't know about it. So yeah, I think there is a lot to do for us as adults to break down some of the preconceptions and maybe misconceptions as well that we have about the online world.
Definitely. And, you know, I think actually doing that collaboratively with young people, and yeah, exactly as you say, like, you go on and you figure out, right, what are these social media spaces, what's going on within these environments, but also actually just asking them about that. Right, what platforms are you using, why, what's the good, what's the bad of it, how are you kind of navigating that? Let's talk about it together, let's explore it together. Not going in saying, oh my goodness, you're doing this and that's automatically wrong. Okay, yeah, you're on a dating app. Okay, what's good about that? What's not good about that, right? How can we kind of navigate that and make sense of some of those tensions and contradictions and about all the stuff that then unfolds within these spaces, rather than being like, oh my God, you're on a dating app, that's terrible. How can we stop you? How can we make you learn that being on a dating app is bad, right? If we're not starting from that point, if we're trying to be more collaborative about it, we can then learn a lot more about the situation. I know, for example, you know, thinking about online sexual behavior, right? And the whole like image sharing thing. I remember, like, when I first started researching this in 2014 for my PhD, you know, the worry was, oh, you know, you've got all these girls online who are sharing pictures of themselves with boys that they fancy. Oh my God, this is awful. How can we stop them doing that? And that was the adult view about what was going on in these spaces. Okay. And that was what all the guidance was about. And that's what all the teaching was about. But then when I started speaking to kids, particularly girls, what they wanted to talk about was the extent to which they were being harassed by being sent unwanted images from boys. None of the adults around them were aware that this problem behavior was occurring, right? Because we weren't asking them. We were just teaching girls not to take a picture of themselves. So this entire set of behaviors that were going on for them online was completely absent from the narrative. But now, what is it, you know, 8 years later, we know about all that now, but that's because we've had to ask the kids about it. We need to not think that us as adults know everything that's going on and have all the solutions and all the ideas. We need to be more collaborative. And I think that can cause a bit of controversy sometimes, particularly, and you can see this implicitly within the DfE guidance to schools. There is this belief that young people shouldn't be dictating the terms of reference too much. They should be learning what we want them to learn. And yeah, I'm not saying it's about like pupils dictating to teachers, because no, that would be inappropriate. But there does need to be some openness to hearing, okay, like, what do you think the problems are? What do you think the solutions are? And working that out together, and being aware that us as adults don't have all the knowledge and the solutions sometimes.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes PSHE really quite difficult, actually, because we as and it links again to something I said before, but we go to university, we study a degree, we get a qualification, and then we consider ourselves to be experts in those subject areas. And then somebody says, okay, so now you're not actually going to teach your French and German, you're going to teach some sex ed. And people just like, it's scary because we're not the experts. The young people are the experts. They're the ones who know what's happening. And it's up to us to absolutely try to navigate them through it, I suppose.
Yeah, do you know what? I think it really does. It goes back to what we were saying at the beginning in terms of professionalizing and the skills that you actually need to deliver it. it does move away from that model of, adult expert having to like implant knowledge in kids' minds. Like an interesting example is with consent, right? Because we think the RSE on consent is about teaching young people what the law says about consent and what affirmative consent is. And that if the kids walk out the room with the knowledge, then brilliant, box ticked, like we've done our job. And, you know, I've had a lot of conversations with young people, but they can recount the law on consent. They know the Sexual Offences Act inside out, right? Because we've taught them that a million times. They know what affirmative consent means. And then you say, oh, okay, so what happens? You must be having these really great consensual experiences in your relationships. No, they're not.
No.
Because they're not being taught about, okay, but what then actually happens in relationships? What skills do you need in order to navigate consent, to be able to communicate consent, interpret it? And even if you've got knowledge and skills, why do non-consensual situations still happen? It goes back to all of those cultural things that we were talking about before. What are the peer cultures? What are the gender stereotypes? What are the social norms and expectations that people are bringing to their relationships that mean that knowledge of the law goes straight out the window and is completely irrelevant? If RSC is not exploring all of that, then we're only really on the first rung of the process. Yeah, absolutely, knowledge needs to be there, but without the skills to act upon that knowledge, without breaking down the social norms that might act as a barrier to that knowledge being able to be applied in a real life situation, you're not even scratching the surface. And that, like we were saying at the beginning, is a really hard thing for teachers to be able to do. Definitely.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot to be said for skills-based teaching, but it's a lot less comfortable than knowledge-based teaching. And I think there's a lot to be done to support teachers, which is obviously what today is part of the process of that. Okay, so one last question. RSC is obviously massive. There's a lot to it. It covers everything from intimate relationships to family relationships to professional relationships, friendships. But ultimately, we're preparing young people for relationships in all areas of their lives, whether that's a sexual relationship or a professional relationship. Do you think that enough is done to link the relationships part of the PSHE curriculum with PSHE more broadly? And how could that be improved?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Like one of the guys who's working on the DFE review with me, Johnny Hunt, who's a real sort of expert in all of this kind of stuff. And he says it's interesting with kids because what we often do, like with kids, is we say, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want as a career, right? What job do you want to do? And we prepare them for different aspects of their lives as citizens, right? But we don't ask them, what do you want in terms of relationships? What relationships do you want to have with yourself, with other people, right? What do you envisage going forward, right? And it goes back to this thing that, you know, the whole citizenship thing that I was talking about with healthy relationships. If it's rather than saying about, okay, what is a healthy relationship? We can say, what does it mean to be a citizen? A sexual citizen, a relational citizen? What is that all about? And that really speaks to your question, because it's about that joined up approach then between relationships and sex with all these other aspects of, personal, social and health development, right? And if we frame our relationships in terms of those other dimensions within our lives, right? We talk to kids about like financial management. Okay, but like financial management as you get older, you know, I'm sure we've all had this experience. God, how important are the relationships in our lives to our finances, right? And that process in relationships of negotiating all of that and dealing with that and being able to have conversations about that is so important. Our career goals, right, are so linked to relationships within the workplace, the impact of our careers on our family life, right? And the decisions we might have to make in terms of our careers and, you know, having children and how we deal with all of that, right? Really important stuff. And we could broaden out, couldn't we, even further from that about the choices women have to make and men within that dynamic. And all of that stuff is so interconnected. Physical health, our sexual health, right, is part of our physical health. Okay, mental health, so connected to the relationships that we have within our lives. All right, we know drugs and alcohol and sex, right, that's often spoken about. Okay, and we know that those links are kind of joined a lot more, let's say, than maybe some of the others. But looking at mental health more broadly, okay, so some kids I've been speaking to recently are really interested in joining the dots between mental health and relationships. They're interested in knowing about how do our relationships impact our mental health? How does the mental health of people around us affect us? There's this sort of narrative at the moment that kids are really aware of, that a healthy relationship, one of the virtues, you know, as problematic as that might be, is supporting your friends and being there for them. But then they're interested in exploring, okay, but what if our friends or our partner is struggling with their mental health? What are my boundaries? What is healthy support for that person? Where does it become toxic? Where does the dynamic become problematic for me? And that's something these kids are really interested in exploring, because there's that whole narrative, isn't there, about mental health kind of circulating in society, and they're struggling to think, okay, what do we actually kind of do about this? And I think joining those dots would help make relationships and sex education less abstract, right? We talk about LGBT identities, don't we? Actually rooting that in history and culture. And it goes back to that idea that it's not just RSE, right? Everybody's an RSE teacher. So in some senses, it's not just joining the dots between RSE and PSHE, it's then joining the dots to the rest of the curriculum, right? And how do relationships and sex education impact, like, you know, how's it being upheld and how's it being taught in all these other subjects as well? And that's simultaneously really challenging, but also really exciting as well. And I think, wow, how incredible if we can make relationships and sex education about that. And it goes back to, you know, a point I made before. Let's get young people joining the dots, right? Rather than us as teachers being like, oh my goodness, like, how do we map all this out? Like, this is so complicated. Let's actually talk to kids and say, all right, today we're going to talk about this topic to do with relationships and sex education. What else do you think you're learning about PSHE? What else is going on within the curriculum that you think is relevant to this conversation? And actually start doing that with them.
I think that's a fantastic point. And I think, again, it comes back to giving the young people some agency over their RSE education, because it does, a lot of it does need to come from them. And I think the reason that is problematic is because it's so different from perhaps other areas of the curriculum. I could talk to you all day about these sorts of topics. Thank you so much for joining us today. Your insight is just like next level fantastic. So thank you so much.
Wow. No problem. It's been absolutely my pleasure. And like you say, yeah, these conversations could just go on, couldn't they? But no, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I hope the day has been great for you all.
Thank you so much, Emily.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Okay, so thank you so much again to Emily. That was just fantastic. And there's a lot that I think that we as educators in schools and colleges can gain from academics at university level. And that's something that as we go through the PSHE Teachmeet process and into the next Teachmeet, which I'm going to make a bit of an announcement about at the end, we will hopefully be able to bring in some more academics, and we've actually already got one lined up. So really exciting to bring university and doctorate level thinking into schools. Okay, so our final speaker is Gemma, who I've already referred to right at the start. Gemma is part of the team, the PSHE Icons team. She's held a variety of different roles within schools, from head of department, curriculum lead, SLE, assistant principal, and is a believer in research-based practice, which is something that is fundamental to PSHE. She's going to talk to us today about magpieing, so finding and making use of free resources to support PSHE delivery. So Gemma, over to you.
Hey, good morning.
Hi. Morning.
Good morning. First of all, I just really want to say a big hello and thank you for joining us this Saturday morning. A huge part to me, I am quite new to the PSHE community, but you've been so welcoming, and it's a real heart of community and a real sort of focus around teaching and learning. My background very much is in teaching and learning. It's about the whole child. It's about building pupils that can access this rapidly changing world and giving them the skill set to navigate it. I'm now at a stage where I've sort of been welcomed into this PSHE community, and from this morning and from my sort of interactions online and through PLNs and so on, what's been really evident to me is that there's a wealth of warriors out there championing a subject that they are A, passionate about, and B, could really potentially change things. And I think if we hold on to that, it's really, really important to do that. But also what is important along with that, the world that we're living in now is so rapidly changing. We don't need to be told that. And we're at the start of a journey almost. Statutory RSE is something new. And it's about us now as practitioners actioning that, turning up in the classroom on Monday and being prepared and having the resources to action that. Everyone that's spoken this morning, from Alice to Emily and so on, have all drawn on the fact that we've got to provide children with a skill set that's going to enable them to challenge and think and build their own values. And some of the initial thinking that I've had, just as sort of being given the freedom to create this curriculum and build it into curriculum time, is how and what I'm going to do that. And at the start of this journey, it did feel completely overwhelming. I'm now, due to the response of this amazing, passionate group of people that you all are, particularly giving up your Saturday mornings, it's become something more than that to me. So what I wanted to do with my presentation this morning is really get across that there is a wealth of opportunities and extra support to support you, because I know there's people like me who are at the start of this journey and need that go-to resource, or want to walk away this morning having a takeaway, because I think any form of PSHE or teaching and learning practice should have that. What's your takeaway going to be? So I've introduced myself, my presentation this morning, and it's going to be in a link on the YouTube at the end, and I'm also trying to get it out there through my Twitter. It's going to be Magpie, what can be found for free to support PSHE? We work in schools that predominantly don't have lots of money, and we're in a situation where we've got to pick up almost a new part of this curriculum with some really challenging concepts and theories, and it tackles people, and people are the trickiest things to tackle. So you'll be able to pick up this slideshow for you to use, for you to dip into, for you to just throw in the bin if you want to, off my Twitter handle at the end, but I'll also make sure it's tagged in the comments at the end of the YouTube. But go away and use it, and even it might be something there that just gives you something to give a contextualize. So documenting the start of my process, and I know I've said it's for free, and there's two things here that aren't for free. I am new to PSHE, but what was really important to me, I am an experienced teacher, I've been teaching for 20 years, but I wanted to really value what PSHE was about and get that understanding. So my starting point, I've heavily used the PSHE Association training. It's been really useful to me. It's given me a broader horizon of what PSHE is about, but also it's been a pool of resources for me as a starting point, because there are going to be people out there like me setting at this department. The other qualification that I've taken in the recent weeks to sort of allow me to really tackle this role as leading PSHE is the National College certificate in the role of PSHE RE. I found that really valuable. I know both of those cost a bit of money, but I just wanted to put that out there because there are things that aren't colossal amounts of money that might just make your staff feel more comfortable or allow them to fit in that comfort zone a little bit further, like was mentioned by Alice Hoyle earlier. There's also a free course there that's by Future Learn, and PSHE Association have worked with it, and the links are all there on all three of them. So that's just a little bit of extra training. There's a caveat to what I'm going to present next. First of all, like all good teaching and learning, it's got to be adapted to meet the needs of your school. There is not a chance that picking up a PowerPoint and running through it step by step is the quick fix to solve the problems of the world, the problems of people, and to tackle these heavy issues that you've had discussed with such passion this morning. It's got to be responsive to your school community, and by that I mean the pupil voice. Let them shape, let them learn from us, let us co-create together, and then some part of element around what's going to be effective in that community as well. I'd love to sit here and say there's a silver bullet that's going to fix things, but there is no silver bullet. Teaching isn't easy. It's hard, and to do it well, it's even harder. But these are things that I hope are going to help you. So really, really quickly, what needs to be done with these resources is they need to be tailored to meet that caveat, but they also need to be tailored to make you think. They are starting points. They are something to go off, particularly if you are new or you're turning up to teach a topic that you might have felt less familiar with, but it's a starting point for you to quality assure and take further forward. And then a huge point, and it really made me feel passionate earlier when it was spoken about by Alice, is this idea of making it stick. We all know for good teaching to stick, it's not a list of rules, it's not a lecture, it's going to need resourcing in such a way and teaching in such a way that makes it stick in pupils' heads. Because at the end assessment, I'll quote just on this, is the assessment of life, and there's no greater one than that. So my presentation will run through a series of resources now. It is going to be whistle stop because I'm also conscious that we've taken enough of your Saturday morning off, but you are going to have access to it to be able to go away, tailor, make your own. It is your takeaway, and please use it. So a series of resources just to start us off regarding sex education. You may have already seen these, you may not. There may be something hiding here that you can go away and use, print off, delegate, look at. There's also going to be some training materials here. So the first three here just focus on sex ed. The government have got a Let's Talk website. It's got a programme of 6 different sessions in there. Through that as well, there's a presentation involved with sexual health services and services for young people. They also have got targeted workshops that they can work with you on, particularly with year 9s who might be considered to be more at risk. It's just a go-to point for you. There's Asset UK, which I know is a Christian charity, but it's got a range of several resources that are on there that are printable, downloadable. Might be something there for you to go and have a look at. In terms of videos and starting points, the BBC have got a series of videos that might act to help develop your, just act as a little bit of a lynch or a starter activity to draw people into those issues concerning RSE, and there's a link there as well. You've probably already seen the Dove self-esteem body image campaign, but it's something else that you can go to. Body confidence, obviously, is something we want to use, something we want to judge, but that's an organisation there that have gone away and tailored those resources. All About You, being run by Always and Tampax, as well as providing free resources into school. There's a series of lessons around puberty, well-being and relationships. And again, it's a starting point, particularly where schools might not have much money to go and purchase a pre-prepared package. That moves on to Media Start, another organisation looking at digital advertising, looking at the influence of marketing on body image and being a tool there for pupils to unpick. There's some videos and things that sit within that. Brooke has been mentioned hugely this morning by several of the speakers. Brooke, for me, has a series of teacher courses that you can take, which are certified, and it allows you to come out of that uncomfortable zone and into your comfort zone, and just helps you to clarify some of what your RSE content and teaching advice should be about. We've got C up there. There's a huge range of resources upon their website, from presentations, lesson plans, just allowing pupils to think, and it could just be a starting point to enable you to explore further. As we move further away from RSE and into sort of mental health and our lifelong learning and life skills, NatWest have got a series of resources sat through their organisation around careers, around transition, as well as money management as well. ChildsNet focuses on that transitional period of primary to secondary, but it also allows pupils to explore this idea of being given their first phone, that initial exposure, how's that's used, A maze has already been mentioned this morning, but there's a link to it there. And then that leads us on to Proud Trust, who've got resources to support the theme of opportunity and social justice. These are just touch points for you, and I'm fully aware that a Google search will turn these out, but sometimes just be given a bit of a direction, particularly in this format, just gives you a starting point. First Aid is sitting through Red Cross, and there's a whole range of resources. They've currently got a scheme as well that is providing a lot of teaching resources and a lot of videos. We've got NSPCC, we've got a series of PowerPoints and resources allowing pupils to explore healthy and unhealthy relationships. NSPCC, they have got a task force of resources sitting behind them. One of the things that looks really interesting from me as someone who's at the start of this journey is they've got a design structure and pro forma around designing the campaign to stop online bullying. So when you're thinking about culture and thinking about pupils, that could be something that's run with the parliament, school council, really champion and bringing on board that whole idea of PSHE, mental health, RSE, culture that we've spoken about. NSHE have a series of resources around puberty, allowing you to explore it just at basic terms, but it's a go-to point. Pfizer have got a series of resources around superbugs and being able to join that fight around vaccines, and that's grown and grown and grown, particularly post-pandemic. And we've got the Ben Kinsella Trust who have got a series of resources on there, video testimonies, but I know they also come out and work with schools as well. We've got a road safety, which is through ThinkGov, and I know that's a bit of a side element, but it is there within the recommended teaching of PSHE. Again, Alice Rugby's trust is there with lesson plans and accompanying resources. Again, revisits this unhealthy and healthy relationships, and we've got the Red Cross there as well, again, looking at wellbeing this time. Just off the back of that, I know at the moment the British Heart Foundation are sending out to schools like an Annie dummy pack to help with first aid. I know that's a bit of a side point, but I just wanted to put that in there because that's something that I've managed to capture in the last few weeks. Facts for Life is there, and it's again focusing around mental health. You need to register to create an account, but it is there in terms of some resources. Equality and Human Rights is there, and it's just breaking down those barriers and allowing conversations in terms of teaching resources around equality and human rights. That moves on to Educate Against Hate. There's a series of resources, particularly some quite powerful videos that sit within that website regarding extremism and radicalisation. And then we've got the PSHE Films Board, and looking at the British Board films and how films are classified to help sort of build some of the thought around stigmatism and what's suitable for what ages. But beyond that, why is it right? Why is it not right for society? Three sort of key things that I also just wanted to share as we move into my final last few slides. The Anna Freud Centre are now working to create, as they always have, but working on two projects in particular, an Aware and Inspire research project, which if you get on their website and follow that link, it's a constructed package to provide staff training in school, but also deliver some workshops to enable their research project. And I think a contribution to this is just really going to help build the power of the PSHE curriculum. We've also got there the government training modules that they've provided, which are hoping to build knowledge and confidence, but also help teachers who might be feeling a bit awkward plan their curriculum. I've also put in there something I randomly found this morning on YouTube, and it was what if Goldilocks had a mobile phone. And I just thought it was something that might link more to our primary colleagues who are here with us or might be watching this at a later date. Finally, just before I move on and pass you back to Jess, this is an organisation called Bloom. Bloom is a free organisation that draws together 4 mental health charities. They're in a situation at the moment where they're free funded up until 2024, and there's 3 options in which you can use them. You can get in contact with them through the blue email addresses that are there, just highlighted in the circle. But they're working with us to help provide some teacher training and some sort of co-delivery sessions, but they are very flexible, I've found in my initial contact points with them, around exam stress, social pressure, dealing with uncertainty and decisions about the future. I think as we move on from that, I think as we move on from that, what becomes even clearer to me is there's a wealth of opportunity out there. There's a whole host of resources. I think what's important now is if we stand together as this solid community and really champion to improve the lives of the kids that we teach. Jess, I think that's it from me.
Thank you so much, Gemma. I cannot believe that that is your idea of a nano presentation. I think you've just given one of the most valuable resource sharing presentations I've ever seen in the education community. That was absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for sharing. And it must have taken quite some pulling together. So thank you so much.
No, that's just the way I tend to approach things. Let's splattergun it and let's get it out there and share it. And that's where we're going to create change. That's
brilliant. Thank you so much. And I'd just like to draw on something Gemma said, actually, and it links also to what Alice has said, and it also linked with what Emily was saying. I think there is so much fantastic practice going on out there, and sometimes it's easy to focus on the things that are difficult and the things that aren't going so well. But actually, the vast majority of schools and the vast majority of deliverers of PSHE and RSE are doing an absolutely fantastic job. And, you know, it's about developing and moving forward. And absolutely, like Gemma said, it's about collaborating and driving forward change together. So thank you so much. Thank you to our sponsors, Pupil Progress and Teachers Love Stationery, for facilitating today, really, and also to today's fantastic and inspirational speakers. So Alice at the start, and then Becky from What's the Debate, Dr. Seti, and Gemma for her session just now, but also for all of the support that she's given me in making this event possible, pulling the event together. I'd also like to thank Tom Rogers and Steph Nichols from TM Icons more broadly for the opportunity really to run a PSHE group, because it's so important. We're all teaching it, and it's important that we're able to have this space to work together on that. And also to Nathan, who has produced the graphics that I've been sharing on Twitter over the last few weeks. Massive thank you to Tim for, once we'd overcome the first couple of bug issues, we've managed, like, it's been seamless. Switching from speaker to speaker, etc. So thank you so much for everything that you've done behind the scenes and for generally putting my mind at rest over the last few weeks with regards to all things IT. So to finish, and bang on time, I'm so happy, I have a very exciting announcement about a face-to-face Teachmeet, which we will be holding for PSHE Icons in May. It will take place on Saturday the 28th of May in Manchester. There's going to be lots more details to follow over the coming weeks and months on Twitter, but we already have some great speakers lined up from universities and also from teachers who are currently practicing in schools. The tickets are available now on Eventbrite, so I will share all of the details with that later this afternoon. It's a completely free event. There's a deposit to pay when you buy the ticket, but you get that back when you attend the event. And we hope to see lots of people there so that we can continue this fantastic community. And if you're interested in being a speaker, please do get in touch with me through either my personal Twitter at Miss Katner or through the TM PSHE Icons page. So all that remains for me to say is thank you so much for joining us this morning, or watching the recording if you're watching it at a later date. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you very much.